What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with a mailbag podcast solo. It is the first Hardwood Knocks podcast of 2024. Wishing everybody a happy new year. It is also, as I record this, my birthday. So if you want to give me birthday shout outs in the comments or just like this video or this podcast and subscribe, share it on Twitter as a birthday present or tell people about us. Just help us continue to grow this community. That can be your birthday present to me if you are a religious listener, and I appreciate all the support from every single person that we get of this podcast. You can continue to engage with us, though, and get in on these mailbags by joining our Discord. The link to that is in the podcast and YouTube description. I know not everyone has Discord. If you don't, just check it out. Download it. It doesn't take a ton. Come in there, start some good discussions. If the link isn't working for some reason, because it's been like a week or two since we got a new member, which is a little bit weird for us, let me know. But again, link is in the podcast YouTube description. Join our Discord. Our socials are in the podcast and YouTube description as well. And I believe that's it. So before we get into this mailbag, recording on my birthday. That's again why I'm just going to give myself a little birthday shout out there. It is my Kevin Durant year, age 35. So for anyone who is wondering how old I actually was, I've gotten everything from who's this kid to why is the age filter on I think that one might have been from TikTok, not YouTube. But yes, I'm age 35. I feel like that's been a mystery around these parts for some weird reason. I don't think that I've hit it at all. I normally try not to do too much work on my birthday. It did not work out like that this year. I'm busy, so I figured, what the hell? Let's make sure I get a third episode up. We did the OG Anunoby trade reaction on Sunday. We'll have this up, and then Grant and I will be back, I think, with a Thursday episode. Maybe it goes live on Friday, but I think we're recording Wednesday night, so it'll go up on Thursday. So that's exciting. And another exciting note, since this can be my rambling portion of my cut is ending. I know that I don't look like someone who goes through like the bodybuilding motions, but I am 11 or 12 days away from my cut ending and being able to eat something other than rice and chicken and potatoes and that type of stuff, like protein powder. Of course, I this year I tried. For anyone who cares, this is a full episode, so I'm going to go. You can skip ahead. There'll be timestamps. This year, I tried to really focus on whole foods. So I didn't have a lot of protein powder during my bulk, but that stuff becomes a godsend when your macros really need to lock in and the carbohydrates are super low and the fat is just incredibly low. It's unhealthily low, and you should not do it for long periods of time. I recognize it's unhealthy. This helps keep me sane, though. I know I'm nearing my end. When I can start to see like a leg pump, like veins in my legs and my calves, we are there, folks. It doesn't take long for me to do it. So I'm excited to be able to eat again. It's been easy. I will say it's been easier this year. I feel like I haven't vented about it as much on the podcast, maybe because I'm recording solo a little bit less, or Grant and I talk a lot about it off air, but I did a better job of not cutting carbs or cutting down my calories too low too soon this time. And so this was a 14-week one. I think last year I did 12 weeks. So I'll survive 98 days, but we're getting close. It's tough around the holidays and my birthday because you just want to indulge. Maybe I'll allow myself some extra carbs in the form of like oatmeal or something tonight. But it's my choice. I enjoy it, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be any less excited that it's coming to an end and I can be a little bit more free with what I'm eating before we start the bulk back up again. That answers all the questions you didn't have about what's going on outside of my life. Let's begin with this mailbag. I'll start with a quick news item that I just want to get to because we're at the point where some of these things are just going to become expired, and this will probably be the hook of the podcast on YouTube at this point. The Pascal Siakam trade rumors are heating up a little bit in advance of following the OG Anunoby trade. I don't know. I think a lot of people viewed this in one of two ways. That this either makes it more likely, having Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett, getting rid of OG, a soon-to-be free agent himself, it makes it more likely that you are going to trade Pascal Siakam, or does it make it more likely that he just signs a 4-year extension now? It could be worth about, I think it's like $190 million. I honestly don't know which school of thought I subscribe to because the Raptors are just wholly unpredictable at this point. I will say, after ruminating more on the OG Anunoby trade, I don't know that I have any strong, like, different feelings of it. I feel like it might be a little bit more risky from the Knicks' perspective than I initially thought, even though I kind of liked it for them a little bit more. I think that was one of the rare trades where I think you could have gotten more for OG earlier on had you made that decision to move him. But if you were invested in him, I kind of understand waiting to see the signs that he's either not staying or he's not developing like you want him to, or what's his role in the larger context, or we don't want to pay him. I think they did well relative to just the stage of his contract and development that he was at. I don't know what it means for Pascal Siakam. Mark Stein, however, did note that teams remain interested, and he names some of the usual suspects. There were I think there were two new ones in there, at least that I haven't thought a lot about, but he names Detroit, which, God, Indiana, Sacramento, and Atlanta. So like those were the four newbies. And then he had Dallas and Memphis as a suitor. And I know some people have speculated about Dallas. And so we'll go through these and then we'll talk about any other teams that I would be interested in seeing trade for Pascal Siakam. I love his fit on a lot of these teams. I think the Pacers probably end up being the cleanest fit. I'm just not sure he's exactly what they need. And he is so ball dominant. Or he's not so ball dominant, but he's ball dominant enough to where what are the concessions you're making with Tyrese Halliburton there? I'm assuming Bennedict Mathurin would be part of that trade. And so making it stagger and giving him lineups where he kind of has the keys should be a little bit easier. And then you're not infringing upon Bennedict Mathurin's development. I just don't know if it feels like Indy needs someone who can slide down to the 3 as well as play the 4 next to Miles Turner. Siakam gives you the 4-5 positionality, so you could play him next to Turner, but you could also play him by himself in lone big lineups. But let's start with the Raptors. I honestly don't know whether this makes it more likely that they move him. My guess would be that they do move him. I just think that the salary structure of their team is weird moving forward. And that's part of the reason I'm reticent to be so high on the OG Anunoby deal for them. You're going to probably have to pay RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickly combined, like, let's say like $52 million, maybe even up to 57 or 60, depending on how much IQ commands in free agency. And then you already have Pirtle on the books. And then if you re-sign Siakam and that's just your core, plus Scotty Barnes' next deal is coming up. He's extension eligible after this year. I would absolutely move Jakob Pirtle if you could. I don't know which teams are going to want that salary. It's not egregious, but $20 million a year for a starting big man who might not close on certain teams just because of the floor spacing element, or if you're worried about his free throws. He is a very smart, cerebral player, though, can help teams. He's not bad. I just think that trade was a terrible idea for the Raptors last season. So I get that you could go that route, but even if your core then just becomes Quickly, Barrett, Barnes, and Siakam, I don't really know what the upside of that is there. It feels like you're still too tethered to what does Scotty Barnes become? But I guess that's me undervaluing. Emmanuel Quickly is really good. And anyone who listens to the podcast knows that I think he's great. I'm a lot lower on RJ Barrett long-term. I guess you can look at it as, well, these are still guys. Quickly's a little bit older relative to the stage of his career, but looking at RJ, he's 23. Barnes is just so young. You still have that upside caked in there. You get expensive a lot faster than I think that you would with a core that you're banking on upside for, should you keep those 4 together. And so I honestly don't know what the Raptors are thinking. And if I was in charge of the team, I probably would figure out ways to finagle keeping Siakam because I like him so much. But the fit next to Barnes can get weird, especially if you're factoring RJ Barrett into the equation and you're going to have a non-spacing 5. My guess is that they move him. Whether they should or not, I don't know. I think he's a really good player. He gets marginalized in Toronto at times. We've seen him go multiple occasions this year, which just feels like he doesn't touch the ball enough in crunch time. In the debut game for Quickly and Barrett, there was a little bit of that for the Raptors down the stretch too. There was a possession where, Pascal Siakam had some brilliant possessions in that game, and there was a couple crunch time possessions where RJ gets tunnel vision or Pascal Siakam just doesn't touch the ball. Not a huge fan of that. It just does seem that the Raptors are kind of pivoting, and just given that Siakam is when you looked at the Anunoby, Trent, Barnes, Siakam quartet, he was the old head of it. It feels like they will move him. Now, getting into the teams that make sense. Detroit, no, just get out of here. What are you sending out here? Are you giving future picks? Are you trying to give up on Jaden Ivey? The Raptors don't really have a need for him anymore with Barnes, or insofar as they did have a need, but you have Barnes, you have RJ Barrett, you have Quickly. So I just don't know what Detroit can, and they just shouldn't be in the business of giving up their own first round picks. If they were putting Cade Cunningham on the table, yeah, sure, but you're not doing that if you're Toronto. Would Toronto be interested in Asar Thompson, or you want to give that up for Siakam? This just feels like Detroit is mentioned as a Siakam destination because they can get to cap space, then maybe look at that over the summer. Of the teams that we're going to go through that were reported, I think Detroit is just my least favorite fit of the bunch, maybe because I don't want to see Pascal wasting away in Detroit, but I also just don't understand what the complexion of that trade package necessarily looks like unless the Pistons are getting wildly irresponsible with their future picks and then just making this sort of, okay, salary and picks type of trade. I don't love it in Atlanta just because I don't know what Atlanta's doing. They're sort of like Raptors South at this point where it's, all right, what is going on here? You've kicked the can a bunch. You've made a couple swings. They haven't really worked out. I'm assuming that DeJounte Murray would be part of that deal in some form, even if he's not headed to Toronto, because can you play with Quickly and Murray and RJ Barrett and Scotty Barnes? You're not going to invest that much specifically in guards with Quickly coming up on free agency, Murray already being paid. RJ, he is kind of a wing, but he's like in that in between. And then Scotty, another primary ball handler. Would there be a third team as part of that? Do you want, you take a flyer on DeAndre Hunter, especially with Scotty Barnes no longer in Toronto, but that can't be the meat and potatoes of your package. You don't really have a need for Clint Capella, Bogdan Bogdanovic, but there would be draft equity in there. I don't think you're going to see the Raptors, as an aside, flip Siakam for basically no draft. I would expect them to get a first round pick, at least one out of whoever they're trading Siakam to. I just don't think he raises Atlanta's ceiling enough. He's not going to fix the defense. I guess if they want to play him at the 5 more, and in the event you're not sending out DeJounte Murray, that gets all sorts of complicated. We've seen Murray improve as, I think, a shooter, and he's been a really valuable offensive player this year. You throw Siakam in there, and is Clint Capella still there? Or even if he's playing with Onyeka Okongwu, the spacing doesn't look great. The shot profile won't look great. I think I like him the second least. So we'll start there. There's the Pistons, then there's the Hawks. Then I think I would go to the Kings. There's a case to have the Kings below the Hawks in this, but the Kings just feel like a smarter organization than Atlanta at this point, and so I would trust them to figure it out. I don't want to see Sabonis next to Siakam. I don't think Siakam's a good enough rim protector to justify it, and then you are going to shrink the floor because Pascal Siakam is not shooting that well from 3. And to have both of those guys on the court in a playoff series, I think it puts a strain on some of your perimeter players. And we've already seen Kevin Huerter be all over the place this year, assuming that he would, stay in that deal. Fox, the shooting has really come along. I've seen people doubt it. And it's just like, I guess at this level, sure, but he's kind of shown that he can be this really good self-creator from the perimeter for a couple of years now. And like the step back 3 has been going for a few seasons at this point. I can't remember what podcast I was listening to, and they were being kind of skeptical about it. And I'm just like, no, I don't think De'Aaron Fox is the best shooter in the NBA, but we're in kind of year 3, 4 of this not being like a complete anomaly. Anywho, I just think that puts about to sneeze. Wait, nope, I didn't sneeze. There you go. So we're about to put, I would just put too much strain on him and maybe even Keegan Murray a little bit. That's even going to increase the difficulty of his wing defensive assignments since Siakam and Sabonis aren't guys who should be going up against wings. If the price was just so low, I get, and you can keep Keegan Murray, who they're not willing to trade for Siakam or anybody else per Stein at this point. Yeah, I guess rolling it into that asset play, but then you do have, in theory, fewer assets to go forward with to address some of your wing defensive issues or just perimeter defense in general. And you have to pay Siakam. If you're just paying Sabonis, Fox is already going to be, like, he was extension eligible this past summer. They offered it. It wasn't long enough. So you're going to have to start worrying about Keegan Murray's next deal. Is going to be extension eligible after next season. Just a very weird setup. I just like them a little bit more than Atlanta because they're going to be playing more meaningful basketball than the Hawks. And that's quite frankly where I land. That leaves us with, I'm going to throw Dallas in here. Now we're going to get to some new teams. I guess I understand the theory of doing it in Dallas, but then are you going to play him with Derek Lively, another non-shooter? Are you just trusting that the way Luka and even Kyrie can sort of create these high quality looks for everyone and uplift these mediocre players into offensive competency that you think Siakam will just be so wide open, the spacing will be so good that he'll shoot well and spot up threes, be able to attack some closeouts? I don't hate the theory there. And I like the idea of, well, let's just get another bigger name in here, someone who plays both ends of the floor, quite frankly. And that's not something the Mavericks have a lot of. And even of the players, Derek Lively being a two-way player, like they're just overwhelmingly flawed, and ditto with Dante Exum or Derek Jones Jr., the closest things they have to two-way players. There's just those really measurable flaws or big question marks. I guess if you're just giving up the 1 first round pick and you can include, I think, what can they give up? 2 swaps at this point, maybe? If that's like the basis of your deal and salary, I get kind of rolling the dice on it, but I think I would still rather see them skew more towards the wing end of the spectrum as that hybrid 3-4 and someone who's actually going to hit their threes. I get that defense is the primary concern. I don't know if that Siakam comes in there. You could really build some electric lineups with him at the 5 and maybe Grant Williams, or if Kleba is healthy, you could do some stuff there. I still feel like it leaves him a little light on the wings, and then you're bankrupting all your other assets to the point where, okay, then you can't go out and get that wing. What is interesting, I just don't know how highly the Raptors valued the value Emmanuel Quickly and RJ Barrett. What do they view them as in the context of that trade? But for the cost that OG Anunoby went for, just my consideration on RJ Barrett's contract, which I think at best is a net neutral right now, had the Mavs not, maybe traded away their 2030 pick swap, like could they have built any of an interesting package there, just throwing in a first round pick, some swaps? I guess they wouldn't have had enough players, let alone a lead guard like the Knicks did. That seemed to be the big thing here. And Quickly being called a lead guard is just a little bit of a stretch, but having that guard type player who's going to stroke threes, create for himself off the dribble, and maybe for others, not having that probably put them at a deficit. They would have been a good Anunoby team, though, had they had the assets for it. And it seems like they were probably closer than I expected, just based off what the Anunoby went for. I do think that might just say more about Toronto's internal evaluation of both RJ and Emmanuel Quickly more than anything else, though. Don't hate Siakam in Dallas. I question whether they have the actual asset firepower to get him. I just don't love it. And I'm also wondering, could they be better served with a smaller type swing? And I don't know who that is. I don't think it's even on the level of if the Hawks are just looking to get off of DeAndre Hunter. But is it just like, can you go out and get a Jay Sean Tate? I think that I would like Jeremy Grant for Dallas a lot more than I would Siakam at this point. And so that type of a player, I don't even hate the idea of Kuzma in there, who probably gives you enough defense. Does he give you enough shooting? I like the Grant fit just a lot more, but those feel like the better types of moves for Dallas. Indy, I'll throw next up here. They're kind of in the same boat, I guess, as Dallas in that sense, where I'd like to see them skew more 3 than 4, but they just the spacing they could create for Siakam. And so even if he's not shooting the 3 ball too well, he'll be open enough to down some of those looks, and he should be able to attack closeouts. I like the idea of getting him in lineups that don't have Tyrese Halliburton. That'll give you more of a North Star in those moments, and he can play with Turner, who at the moment, at least for one more season after this one, it's just so cheap that after you re-sign Siakam and you don't have too much equity invested in your front court, what is the cost of getting him? You have to match money here. I guess Bruce Brown would be part of that outgoing money. Would it be? Toronto should want Buddy Hield. If you're going to add Siakam into the equation, though, you might really need Hield, though, sticking in Indy. Does Toronto even want Benedict Mathurin at this point after getting RJ Barrett or Emmanuel Quickly? How would they evaluate him? I'll just assume Jarris Walker would be part of that trade. If you're going to get picks from Indy, one of those young players, and then salary, I guess that's the reasonable place to start. And I think that the Pacers, that Siakam does more for that team than a lot of the other ones that were mentioned in here. I just, again, as so many teams are looking for these 3-4 types, I might appreciate Jeremy Grant or Kyle Kuzma in Indy more than I would Siakam. This comes closer to being borderline for me, where it's, if the price isn't too steep, or maybe it doesn't cost you as many picks and you're getting rid of Mathurin and Walker and Siakam's coming in, and you're getting to keep Buddy Hield as part of that, I think Bruce Brown becomes a little bit less important. And we're seeing that he's just not, I think we had someone in the Discord was unhappy with his defense this year. I don't want to say he's been miscast necessarily. He's probably been a little bit less impactful on offense than I would have assumed. It's just he's not that player, and you sort of signed him to be that stopgap. Siakam's fit in Indy, though, I just, you would have to tell me what is the cost for Indy. And then on the flip side of that, I don't love the potential return for Toronto. If you're looking for picks focused and it's just Jarris Walker picks and salary, I guess that's semi interesting. I'm just not a Benedict Mathurin guy. It feels like, and you already have that inconsistency element with RJ there. And of course, having Quickly already there too. I don't know how much you need Benedict Mathurin type to evaluate, but I would love to see sort of a 5-man unit, assuming none of these guys get dealt in the Siakam trade, of Siakam, Miles Turner, Buddy Hield, Halliburton, and then Aaron Nesmith. Like, that is a lineup that could, I think, really do some two-way damage for the Pacers, which is why I would put them fairly high up on this list. Would they be my top billing for Siakam in general in a vacuum where, hey, we're going through teams that they should forget about? Well, don't forget about assets, but just forget about the realism of how interested they are. I guess the Pacers come pretty close to being like a favorite destination, but the next team I'm going to put up here is the final team. That was the one that just sort of snuck into the Stein report. I kind of like the Grizzlies. You have Jaren Jackson Jr. there. I don't know if you get him enough rebounding mileage out of the Siakam, Jaren Jackson Jr. front court, but that's not any different than, it can't be any worse than some of the front court combinations you're running out right now. Salary structures in Memphis make it difficult. You're not going to trade Desmond Bane or Jaren Jackson Jr. or John Morant. So you're looking at like salaries to use to match at least two of Brandon Clark, Steven Adams, and Luke Kennard, all three of whom are injured and banged up. Two of whom have not played at all this season, and Clark and Adams. So you need a whole lot of picks in there to really make that work. And it might even be all three of those players. I don't know if your Adams has 1 year left on his deal. It's not a huge amount, so it's not too backbreaking. Do you like Clark if you're Toronto? It just feels very lopsided. Do you get Marcus Smart in on that trade? Is that something you look at? Would Toronto have interest in him maybe after having moved Anunoby? So you could build some stuff where it's Smart and then another one of those salaries I mentioned. I'd probably go with, I might just take the flyer on Kennard if they're offering both, but I don't know if they would be offering both. But Memphis, so they can get there with the money while keeping Bane, Jackson Jr., Morant. They have all their own first round picks. They did burn some pick equity on the Marcus Smart trade itself, but they have first round picks to trade. The idea of having Morant, Bane, Jackson, and Siakam, and then I don't know who is still part of that. I think, if Smart is still there because you just gave up all the first round picks and salary matching, all right, that's a lineup that could do some defensive damage. Do you get enough spacing? I think between, just having Desmond Bane, Ja, Smart as the secondary option, and of course Triple J, I think it's enough. But if you keep Luke Kennard as part of the deal, and maybe Marcus Smart is going out, and Luke Kennard is actually healthy, there's a lot more spacing there, and I think you have enough. Siakam, Jaren Jackson Jr., and even Bane, you have enough defense in there to do some damage on that end of the floor. I would just be, maybe it's because I have such a, not an undefined hold on it, but it's just such a curiosity. I wouldn't mind seeing Siakam in Memphis. Might be my favorite destination of all the rumored ones that have been mentioned. Whether their package stands up to others, I think if you're looking at the Kings, if you're looking at the Hawks, even if you're looking at the Pacers, not really so much the Mavericks. I guess the Mavericks. All the other teams I feel like can do more for the Raptors in terms of providing immediate impact players, where it doesn't seem like the Raptors are looking to just start over, tear it down, and rebuild. So that's where Memphis is going to struggle. You have to be fine with Luke Kennard's health and or be really high on Marcus Smart should you be Toronto. Not outside the realm of possibility. It just feels like oddly sized if you all of a sudden have Marcus Smart and RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickly, and then Scotty Barnes and Jakob Poeltl. I guess that's like, maybe I'm underestimating how big RJ actually is. It would be a weird. You could do a lot of different things with that, but if you're still having Dennis Schroeder on the roster with that, it does feel like you skew a little bit too far towards the guard end of the spectrum. But Schroeder's reasonably priced at the moment, not on a long-term deal. So perhaps if you really like Smart in Toronto, that is something that would appeal. Smart, another salary or two, and picks. Maybe take a flyer on one of the younger guys too. Do they want a Santi Aldama, a Zaire Williams rebuilding project? Is there any value for David Roddy or Jake LaRavia at this point? Do you like Xavier Tillman as sort of a backup big type? I would love to see the Jackson Siakam front court dynamic, basically, is where I'm at. And I think just having Ja and Bane, that would be all sorts of fun. I think that makes Memphis just an incredibly immediate threat. Like, should they even make the play-in, to have those top four, because I like Siakam way more than I do Marcus Smart, I think you just become more of a threat. If we're looking for any dark horses that can kind of come out of left field here, I know people have mentioned the Thunder. Siakam's a little bit too, if he's going to be that ball dominant, I also want him to be a better shooter than he is. And I also definitely want Josh Giddey being sent out as part of that trade. So I don't love the idea of, well, let's cannibalize some touches from J-Dub and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and give it to Siakam. And just some of the offensive concerns that they have had with their top end units, where it doesn't feel like there's enough shooting or spacing at times, as drive heavy as the Thunder are. I don't love it. I could understand it, but I don't love it. They're not a team that I would necessarily circle in the Siakam sweepstakes. I'm surprised that Golden State hasn't been mentioned more. Maybe there's spacing concerns there. Do they just not want to inject another curveball into the equation when this season has already kind of gone off the rails? But they have a lot of questions on defense, especially without Draymond Green. Uh, Playing Siakam with Steph, that is just a two-man dynamic that I think could develop exceedingly well. I think at this point, because RJ Barrett is now in Toronto, you're probably looking at more of, well, and Quickly's in Toronto. I think it would still be the Chris Paul and Stuff route is just the cleanest way to get there. But perhaps you did give up on OG Anunoby. Does that make Andrew Wiggins more valuable to Toronto in those potential talks? And if he does, like, how many picks are you attaching, and how do the Warriors feel about going wing for kind of big, and then your best wing defender at that point is Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody, assuming both stick as part of that deal? I just think for how urgent Golden State's timeline is, I like the idea of Siakam with them more than I do some of the other teams. Detroit, certainly, then we mentioned Atlanta, then we mentioned. I do worry about the floor balance if Draymond Green is going to stay as part of that deal. At the same time, you've played him a bunch with Kevon Looney. Maybe you make it work. I think I'd just be more concerned with, you kind of need to still hold out hope for Wiggins in that vein, since Siakam's not a wing. And then can you afford to give up Wiggins in that package? I think I would say no, just because you're getting Siakam's creation, which cancels out some of what Chris Paul does for you, and just the emergence of Podziemski probably helps you, offset that a little bit more. But I could also understand the thought process of Toronto valuing Andrew Wiggins more than Chris Paul's ostensibly expiring contract. That feels like pretty much it when you're looking at prospective Siakam suitors. I don't think that, we've seen Houston kind of poke around like second bigs. I don't think they're ones that are going to get in there. Siakam does not work in New Orleans. They have the powder to make a move, but it's just, that's not it. I don't think the Hornets are going to just lose their minds and decide to skew towards a win now move and get, like, that would be very Detroit. Siakam in Brooklyn interests me a little bit if you don't have to give up Mikal Bridges and you're confident that he's going to resign, and they have the salary structure just to make that work. How many picks does it take, though, at that point? And do you think that you can play Siakam and Nick Claxton together? You certainly can't play both of them with Ben Simmons. Siakam and Ben Simmons together could be an issue. Is Ben Simmons' salary being moved as part of that trade? You can get there without, just because you have Spencer Dinwiddie, you have Dorian Finney-Smith, you have Royce O'Neal's expiring contract. Don't love him in Brooklyn. He's not the guy that I would go all in for, but depending on the cost, Mikal Bridges and Siakam moving forward. Uh, and then I think you could probably get him to play with Nick Claxton. I trust Siakam more than I do Ben Simmons to make that work. I've thought a little bit about Chicago, just they're playing well. The Zach LaVine Siakam challenge trade is no longer really, a possibility insofar as it ever was, just based off what Toronto already did. Uh, but Siakam in Chicago, like, sort of taken up. I don't want to see him play too much next to Vooch, but like, if you can use him as the lone big and in lineups with DeRozan and all the kind of wings that they have, like Kobe White, the way he's been playing, you just don't have a lot of pick equity. And so you do have guys that could probably help Toronto right away. Are you willing to go a pick in Patrick Williams and salary? Is there a third team that would send you stuff for Zach LaVine as part of that deal? Because I just don't think Toronto's going to be interested in him after getting Quickly and also Barrett to a lesser extent. That might be something to monitor. I wouldn't just, I don't want to see Chicago tilt towards the win now direction, even if they could put up a really good package for, I think it could be a competitive package. When you're looking at the first that they have available to give up, is Patrick Williams included? You have to hold on to Kobe White as part of that deal, I think, to make it the most worthwhile. I don't know that Toronto's going to have an intense amount of interest in Alex Caruso, just because then you're skewing smaller, but that is someone who could defend his ass off. Would you play him and Quickly together, him, Dennis Schroeder and Quickly and Barnes, and go the three guard route? Like, that gets a little complicated. So maybe a trade here is just more complex and less doable than I initially thought. But like, kind of just having Siakam, and I probably like Siakam in Chicago a little bit more if LaVine is still there. That could just be a team I would see, like, sort of sneak up in on that. That would pretty much do it. In terms of just, I don't think the Clippers, I do feel like they might have the horses to get, if they were dangling Terrence Mann, the first round pick they could give up. They still have matching salary to send out. I don't know if you want, like, Norman Powell necessarily. I think you need more of a Jeremy Grant type, just someone who's more plug and play, whether they're big or a wing, since you have Harden, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard. And so I think, just in a vacuum, my favorite Pascal Siakam trade destinations that I think are both realistic and, well, I don't know if one of them is realistic, but Memphis might be my favorite Pascal Siakam destination. Indy is still up there. I kind of still like Golden State, and I don't mind Dallas. How's that for just sort of this lukewarm and tepid whatever? And I think that kind of does it for me. I don't want to see him, even if the Lakers had the assets to get it done, where it's, yeah, like, we'll take your distant first and whatever else you could offer, swaps, and then Rui Hachimura and D'Angelo Russell. That's not going to be enough. So let's not even waste time on that. I thought about the Jazz briefly, but if you had Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler, and Siakam, that's probably, it's probably, you would get some creation from Siakam, which is what they need. And so that makes it a little easier on Keontae George. I just don't, that would be such a weird pivot for them to acquire this soon to be free agent. I think I'd rather see OKC take that's the one where I don't love the fit, but if they were going to make a swing and they don't want to give up like 8 first-round picks to do it, it's just, oh, this only cost us 2 first-round picks and a young player or something along those lines. I think I'd like OKC a lot better than I would like a Utah, a Sacramento, certainly a New Orleans, more than a Dallas too. So I don't know where OKC rates on like the whole rankings I just went through. Definitely below Memphis and Indy for me, which I guess are my 2 favorite spots, even though I don't think Siakam's the perfect destination for or I don't think Siakam's the perfect player for Indy. Is OKC like a solid? They're my top 5, probably, just sort of thinking about it. I like them more than Sacramento, like I said, or Dallas. Do I like them more than Golden State? Probably not, just because Golden State's timeline's more urgent. And let's just see how far this Thunder Thor could take. And I really just want Lauri Markkanen to end up in OKC. I also wouldn't mind a Jeremy Grant trade to OKC. Nice little reunion there. Let's dive into the actual mailbag. And so we will begin with a question from Muckle. Who is your rookie of the year? Why is it Craig Porter Jr.? I'll answer the first part of this question. Chet is my rookie of the year right now. I had Wemby for the longest time. The efficiency is just, I can't overlook it. Chet has true shooting over 65. His role is easier, and that certainly matters offensively anyway. Or at least the Thunder also putting him in better spots to succeed. The Spurs have started doing a better job of that with Wemby, but it's still not there on offense, and the efficiency is just too much to overlook. So I think it's Chet. Wemby's probably still second. Now, Craig Porter Jr., I don't know where he'll end up in this discussion. I don't expect him to register in the rookie of the year discussion. He is the best rookie, though, that probably nobody is talking about. And you would even need to, when you want to we'll get into what I like about him in a second. When you're even kind of trying to consider, could he make an all rookie team? There's a few things just depending here. He's only made 22 appearances for under 400 minutes. I don't know if he's going to have the sample. He's also on a 2-way contract. And so they're going to need to convert him for him to necessarily really play enough, I would believe, to register in that discussion. And those are things holding him back. However, to get someone who's undrafted and having this much of an impact, in part because of injuries, but just in general, from what you've seen of him, there's a peskiness to him defensively, especially when he's guarding secondary guys. He'll break up plays away from the ball as well. He's a stellar rebounder for his size and will hit the glass there. And that defensive energy is important. It makes you plug and play. On offense, he is a little bit less plug and play in the sense that I think he's a pretty good passer. He's not making any complicated passes, but he's going to make the right passes. And he's not going to turn the ball over a ton. He's turning the ball over on fewer than 3% of his drives right now. There's only one other player who has an assist rate north of 12 with a turnover rate below 3 on 100 or more drives this year. That's Peyton Pritchard. And so it's not like star company. We're talking about pretty low volume guys overall, but taking care of the ball, making good decisions when he's in the lane. But when you look at his actual scoring offense is where it feels like he can be most valuable, or at least that's what is most effective for him when he is managing the game. He just has this way of wriggling into the lane and around defenses and sort of probing them. And he's a threat to score from a bunch of levels. Or a bunch of levels. There's not a bunch of levels. He's a threat to score from multiple levels. He's hitting 48.6% of his pull-up twos. But he's also kind of shown you that he can hit. It's not just dribbling into these pull-up twos. Shooting 8 of 14 on turnaround jumpers. And he's also 9 of 15 on step-back jumpers. And so there are levels to his levels of scoring when you're looking at the jumper types that he can get away with. He's not taking a lot of just off-ball looks. He can move around without the ball fairly well, but only 1.5% of his shot attempts have come as catch and shoots right now. That speaks to how the Cavs are using him and what they're turning to him for, which is just offensive game management. And so he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot of the time when he's taking the court. But that does complicate the scalability of, does he need to be, can he play alongside like another 2-ball dominant type guys, or is he going to need to be someone who strictly leads second units? I just think you look at the way he plays and there's just this like steadiness to him that will give your offense an equilibrium while also not sacrificing anything on the defensive end. This feels like someone who could stick, feels like someone that the Cavs might need to figure out how to convert, especially if, injuries continue to dampen them. We had Darius Garland dealing with a broken jaw. Ricky Rubio is not with the team right now while he's dealing with his mental health, and it seems like they will either buy him out or trade his contract at some point. Donovan Mitchell's missed a couple games. He is back, though. You do have Caris LeVert there. This could be someone who becomes more valuable to them depending on if this team makes a trade, where if they use Caris LeVert's salary to do something else, that makes Craig Porter Jr. a lot more important, even if both Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland are healthy. But I do think he will, depending on how many minutes he plays, this will be someone who might be worth some just all rookie type consideration. And he's not rookie of the year material right now, but this was a fantastic find. I'm going to say they got 3 great finds leading into this year. Max Strus has just been fantastic, where it's just not the shooting and the volume. It's the stuff that you can do inside the arc and the playmaking for them. And then you have Craig Porter Jr. and then Sam Merrill's been really good. Watching him, because they were playing the Raptors, and every time I watch him, there's just like something about his shooting form. And I tweeted this out on New Year's Day. There's something about Sam Merrill's shooting form that makes me think he holds the Pop-A-Shot record at dozens of Dave & Buster's locations across the Midwest. That's what I think of when I watch Sam Merrill shoot. And so they've had some really good back to mid end of the rotate. Well, Max Strus is at the top of the rotation, but they've had 3 good finds heading into like for this season. So kudos to the Cavs. And I think that Craig Porter Jr. is a name that you're going to, I would think, want to learn. Maybe this is sort of just, he's played in sub 25 games and some of that shine is going to wear off. But that is someone who has helped the Cavs. Like, he's been a necessity for the Cavs is what I would say. Whether he remains that is a matter of course, but just one of the guys that no one is talking nearly enough about. If you go through it on every single team, I still think that even Sam Merrill's got some shine. We know Max Strus has gotten shine. You look at Cleveland and it's certainly Craig Porter Jr. Let's kind of stick with this rookie theme. We had a question from Rubik's Gal. Where is it? Okay. If you clean up Wemby's shot chart, i.e. eliminate his 20-foot jumper for crying out loud, and strike any passes from Jeremy Sohan, would Wemby win Rookie of the Year? My answer is maybe, after going through the exercise of doing this. So I did it in a couple separate ways. Wemby is shooting under 24% off passes from Jeremy Sohan. That's not good. So if you remove those from Wemby's total shots on the season, he will go from, he's currently at 51.1% on twos to 55.7% on twos, removing his shots off of Jeremy Sohan passes. He would go from 31.5% on, he would go to 31.5% on threes, up from 29.9. Not a huge difference, but it'd be nice to be above 30%. His true shooting, again, removing all the shots he's taken off of Jeremy Sohan passes, would go from 53.2 to 57.9. The league average is about 58. So that's a pretty big deal. That's not enough, I think, to have him be Rookie of the Year. I guess with the switch they made for him on defense and how I really do believe he's already transcendent on defense. As bad as the Spurs have been for stretches and just most of this year on defense, I think Wemby's already, or at least showing the makings of a generational defender, especially now more than ever that he's their primary big. But when you have Chet at 65 plus true shooting, I don't think you hovering around league average is enough. Now, if we remove I'm going to remove long mid-range jumpers from Wemby's shot diet, and those are twos that are outside of 14 feet. He's taken too many of them, and he's shooting 29% on them. If you remove that from the equation, his 2-point percentage goes from 51.1 to 58.5%. His true shooting would then climb to 57.6%. Since we're not bumping up the 3-point shooting there, you're still going to hover below league average. The bigger difference would come, let's just remove those long twos from the equation and all 3-point shot passes from Jeremy Sohan. his true shooting goes up to about 60 in that regard. And then it gets interesting where it's okay. A lot of these looks are still going to be, if they're not self-created, they're going to be a little bit more complex than Chet is taking. And so if you have this version of Wemby with 60% true shooting as opposed to 53 true shooting, I think that might make him rookie of the year. Now, I would probably still say no. There's a narrative base of this, and I tend to underweight narratives or scoff at them a lot of the time, but this I think is a fair one. Rookie of the year is not about who's going to be the best rookie, like who's going to be the best player overall in the years to come. If you're using that as a tiebreaker because it's so infinitesimally close, I get it. It's supposed to tell the story of this season. I do think Wemby is a huge storyline for this season, but Chet Holmgren is the second best player on the second best team in the Western Conference. And maybe he's the third best player, depending on how you feel about J-Dub. He's arguably a top 2 player on what might be the best team in the Western Conference. I think feel better at this point about OKC's playoff stock than Minnesota's, just in terms of offensive questions. I think they both have their own sort of voids they need to address there. That's a really big deal, and I think it needs to factor into the rookie of the year discussion. I think I will argue this no end. Wemby's role is a lot harder right now, including on the defensive end. I firmly believe Chet Holmgren is just a lot better in his role, and I don't want to penalize him too much for just playing with superior teammates and then being put in better positions to succeed because of having better teammates and a better rotation. I will say, look, Wemby, I wonder if experimenting with the floor general reps for Jeremy Sohan, not starting Trey Jones, that has probably cost him rookie of the year ground, because Wemby's effective field goal percentage jumps by 10 plus points when Trey Jones is on the court. And so there are a lot of these things. You can't just subtract all the long twos, but if you had a version of Wemby that's at 60 true shooting, and again, that's not totally bonkers just because league average is 58 right now. 60 is kind of the marker where I still look at it and go, oh, that's great. But we're kind of beyond, especially for someone who should in theory live inside the arc. It's not out like completely outside the realm of possibility for a rookie of his size. I ultimately don't think any of the stuff I just did is enough. But if you give Wemby 60 true shooting on what he's doing defensively, I think that makes this discussion a lot more interesting to have. To where right now, I think you almost need to default to Chet Holmgren. We'll see if he hits a rookie wall, how the rest of the season goes. But the fact that he's been as good as he is, and on top of that, it's for a team that's as good as they are. I'm not saying he's the driving force, but he's a transcendent rim protector himself at this point. So I think he has it on lock, and it would take a real monster about face inefficiency from Wemby. And a lot of that might not necessarily be on him. He could change some of the shots he's taking. The Spurs, I think, have done a better job of putting him in spots on the floor, regardless of who else is on the court with him lately, to get his looks up. And I appreciate this experimentation. I think self-discovery is really important. And with Wemby, you're still trying to figure it out. Whereas with Jeremy Sohan and the floor general experiment, you just kind of know that's not going to settle into a productive normal. But I like Chet Holmgren is just so much closer to a finished product right now. It would be really tough for Wemby, I think, to come back and seize rookie of the year, which is an odd thing to say when we have more than half the season to go. Maybe it's premature. They're still 1 and 2 for me. If you care about third, I think Jaime Jaquez Jr. has worked his way into that discussion. I think you could make cases for Derek Lively. Brandon Podziemski might be working his way into that. Brandon Miller, not so much. Certainly an all rookie case. Scoot Henderson, I think he's going to like kind of meander his way in this discussion. He's been playing a lot better of late. So I think third right now, is it comfortably Jaime Jaquez? It's close. Like I think third would be the fascinating discussion, but right now I'm still more inclined to go with Jaime Jaquez than anyone. I'm trying to think of off the cuff, off rip, because I wasn't thinking about number 3 in rookie of the year if I had really forgotten anyone. And I don't think that I did there. So fascinating question from Rubik's Gal. Next question will come from Drizzy Watts. Asks, what is the ideal player profile for a backcourt partner of Tyrese Maxey in the playoffs? We had some answers in the Discord, so I'll address those about the actual players. It's someone who could defend the point of attack no matter that player's size or physiological profile. I would say, unless you're going to get a specific player, I probably want that partner for Maxey to be 6'5" or bigger, maybe even taller than 6'5", but 6'5" at the least. I think ball skills would be a plus here because the Sixers could use another creator, especially in lineups that might not have Maxey. But the defense is probably more important. And then you just want someone who can reasonably space the floor, maybe attack in open space, get going downhill off the catch, what have you. Because when we were talking ideal, it's okay. The answers we got were Paul George or Jimmy Butler. That's the answer. But what you're trying to make concessions and be more realistic of players who actually exist too. But I think if you had to pick one, I'm going to skew more towards the defensive end of the spectrum rather than this player needs to be two-way or he needs to provide X amount of creation. You don't want him to be a spacing liability, but if you went with a defense first non-star type, obviously smaller end of the spectrum, probably like a Lou Dort, like someone like that where they'll get up threes at least and will attack in open space off the dribble. And when you're looking at kind of offense first as a non-star, maybe Devin Vassell. And he probably provides enough defense to where he's not no defense. And so that would be kind of a fascinating proposition. If you're looking for, and I feel like Devin Vassell might be too high end, the complete, like this is a role player because we don't want to focus just on stars, but it's the most complete role player type. KCP feels like a good one. That dude just goes there and wins and just does his job. And I don't know if he'll ever make all defense. I think he slipped after kind of a hot start there and he can go through lulls offensively, but that's just someone who will fill a ton of gaps. And so KCP is sort of the non-star type. If you're looking now, if we want to get super ambitious, even a non-star type, and this is Derek White would be a really good fit next to, again, not someone who's going to necessarily fit the size criteria that I put. Do you want a little bit more out of him from an offensive scoring perspective? Perhaps, but like he's a good enough passer and just a hellacious defender. That would be perfect. Obviously not gettable. And that's where I get caught up in this because someone like Devin Booker makes a lot of sense next to Maxey. I think not so much lately, but he's improved enough defensively over the years to where I think you look at a Maxey Booker backcourt and it's okay. Like we're comfortable with it. But like Paul George, Jimmy Butler, even though those guys aren't necessarily considered, they could play the two. What are positions at this point? You want to be realistic about it. And it's, well, who's ideal and then might be potentially gettable here. That's why I kind of thought about Dort. I thought about Lou Dort just because I don't think he's untouchable in OKC. I do think he's more important to them than Josh Giddey, if anybody cares about that. So I think this is the name I will set on. Is Mikal Bridges, of someone who I could see becoming available, is very high end, is not super duper high end, but he's high end enough. I like, does he give you, I think he gives you everything that you need. He probably checks all of the boxes without being the best solution possible, to where it might be someone who is a master of nothing almost on offense. But I mean, you just look at, and that's even too cruel, but it's now you slide him into a role where he's your third highest usage player, but he also at times might be your second, depending on sort of the matchup, where at least he doesn't have multiple perimeter players in front of him. Where in Phoenix, it was, okay, we very much have Chris Paul and Devin Booker here. I know you have Joel Embiid, but there's just something a little bit more sensible about when it's Maxey and Embiid. It's just the 1-3-5 almost type of balance there. You know what he's going to give you defensively, can just go check the opponent's best player, especially if his offensive usage doesn't need to be too complicated or too high. Gives you, though, I think, enough playmaking or just enough ball skills to where if you need to run him and Embiid without Maxey, or you're looking for someone to do, you don't ever want to separate. Well, not ever separate, but you want Embiid on the court with Maxey more, and you want to bench both those guys at the same time. I think Mikal Bridges is someone who could slide in there. That would be the name for Philly, which is ironic because they could have had Mikal Bridges. But that's the guy where it's, okay, what is Brooklyn doing? I don't think they're going to trade him, but he's certainly more available than a Jimmy Butler. The answer is not Zaire Smith, unfortunately. I would argue Mikal Bridges is more likely to become available this season than Derek White. And so that's why I sort of settle on that. That's a great question. Let's stick with the Sixers, though, because I think that we have another question. It was from Rubik's Gal. I'm going to do just 2 questions per person, by the way. We'll cap a max on that. If you want to join in on these mailbags, Discord, you can email us as well. HardwoodKnocks@gmail.com. I will get to it. You can message me on all the other social media accounts. And I do sometimes send out Twitter solicitations because I want to cater to everybody. But join our Discord. Be a part of that community. We have a lot of OGs who are really driving discussions. There's a bunch of you in there that talk all the time. I like seeing it when I'm not participating in the discussion. I like reading what you guys have to say. So join Discord, our Discord. Links in the podcast and YouTube description. And if you're not about Discord, change that. Do it. Just try it. You don't have to be in there all the time. Just join our Discord, please. Tobias Harris, though, question from Rubik's Gal. Is Tobias Harris going to get any love from anyone? He is shooting 51, 47, 91 for 17.6 rebounds, 3 assists, and a steal. And he ranks right up near the top of the Sixers in most hustle stats, loose balls recovered, deflections, and threes contested. So, look, here, I want to, in defense of Sixers fans and people who overlook Tobias Harris, here's the one thing that doesn't count as a defense anymore. The Tobias Harris contract. For what the Sixers were at, it's just, I get why you give the 5. They chose wrong. If it was an either or thing between Jimmy and Tobias Harris, they were good enough or had aspirations that were high enough to say, we're going to pay Tobias Harris. It doesn't matter if he's our 3rd or 4th best player. That's just the cost of doing business at what you thought was a championship level. I still get that his pay grade was too high relative to the value he's providing. Even as the pecking order changed, now he's number 3 in it. He's taking up less than 29% of your salary cap this year. It's an expiring contract. I know the number, $39.3 million, looks like a lot. I get it. But like, it's an expiring contract now. That is not, I want to make clear, the reason that he should be, like, if he's not receiving enough recognition and it's because people say he's overpaid, that's a shitty reason. It's not a valid reason, quite frankly. A more valid reason would be he just seems to be non-existent to bad to losing his superpowers on offense for too long. He starts off really hot this season, goes through some cold stretches. Seems like he's perking up a little bit from what I've seen lately. That's good. He needs to be more consistent. And part of that might be trying to find the balance of looking at everything he needs to do for the Sixers on both ends, where he's kind of toggling between these different existences. And you can call him the 3rd option, but at times it's really like, well, is it not? You have, now that Nicholas Batum is there as sort of this connective tissue, but there's also DeAnthony Melton, and then Kelly Oubre Jr. we know is not going to pass. He's toggling between a bunch of different existences. And I think that does complicate his offensive role. He deserves more credit, though, for doing it and doing it well for long stretches. The fact that he's dropped below 35% on spot up threes for a year could be another reason why he's going overlooked. I actually think he mostly needs to be given more credit. This is the thing that I think is underrated for his defense, where it's not lockdown, but it's, I have watched him or have seen that this season, I've seen him defend that he has defended Karl-Anthony Towns, Pascal Siakam, Scotty Barnes, Jason Tatum. Like, that's kind of the positional spectrum he's dealing with, where if you're a wing combo forward big and to have to tackle that, and there's sometimes been some smaller players that he'll find himself onto, not in super duper high volume, I want to be clear, but like the primary reps for sure, those are the guys that he is going up against. That's no small shakes. And he holds his own a lot of those times. It isn't always pretty, but like, and you have Joel Embiid as the backbone of your defense, but when you don't have the option of like, who else are you throwing on those dudes? Because you don't have the size. Even you can see that, yeah, DeAnthony Melton is great. He might struggle against a Kyle Kuzma or a Denny Avdia or a DeAndre Hunter just because of the size difference. And I'm like, no, Tobias is going to get those guys. And there's going to be certain nights where he has to deal with some of the more mobile sort of forward types, where it's, when Obi Toppin was a staple of the Pacers, you're going to watch him on him, or Patrick Williams, or I've seen him defend Paolo Banchero. It's just, he's all over the place. And I have named, when you get to Banchero and Siakam and Kuzma, kind of feels like you're dealing with the same archetype of player. Karl-Anthony Towns doesn't fit that mold. Scotty Barnes doesn't fit that mold. Evan Mobley, that doesn't fit that mold. And so I think he deserves a lot of credit for what he does on the defensive end. The path to him, what I do appreciate about him on offense is, for the most part, we need to value the 0 to 1 dribble decision-making, I'll call it, where that renders him such an easy fit on almost any team. Is someone who, maybe not all the time, but he is okay making those quick decisions to pass, shoot, drive, attack, whatever. And to have that in someone who can also play as well defensively as he is, in the size, it's 6'8", 6'9", that he is, that's a big deal. And at the same time, he still does have that mismatch attacking element to his game. He's shooting 52.7% on 60+ turnaround jumpers this season. That's the stat I decided to cite and unearth here. He can punish dudes in the post on those turnarounds. Maybe you don't always want him taking those. That's like, this is someone who is just can wear a bunch of different hats and not look exceedingly overtaxed. Now, he goes through those valleys where it does look like he's maybe not overtaxed, but just sort of doesn't know what he's doing or loses himself within the offense. And I would like to see the 3-point volume come up for him, especially given the dynamics of this team. But Tobias Harris is probably one of the most underrated players in the NBA at this point. I think he can be maddening from a perspective if you need him to be your third best player every single night and to help you win playoff series. Have we ever seen him reach the defensive level Andrew Wiggins did during the 2022 postseason? Look, he's come a lot closer than not. Wiggins handled some more point of attack assignments there. You can't trust Tobias Harris to be that player. Frankly, you can't trust Andrew Wiggins to be that player, as we're seeing now. I do think he's probably one of the more underrated players in the NBA, and I'll be so interested to see. Maybe he gets traded this year if the Sixers are looking to take back big money. But if you're Sixers fans, Batum's supposed to retire at the end of this season. And it's just like, don't start talking about Batum and Rocco and just like, oh, we have enough like to get by without Tobias Harris. Just be careful what you wish for there. It's different if you're bringing someone else in. He's part of a trade, but he's going to hit free agency. He'll have his suitors. If you're still going to be paying him $30+ million a year, is that how you want to use that salary slot? It's a discussion. But be careful what you wish for here, because I do think he is one of the more underrated players in the league at this point. Next question, we'll hold that for the end since it's about me personally. I love when people care enough to ask about myself. I do appreciate that. Unbiased Pistons fan, when will the suffering end? But in all seriousness, who's going to get snubbed from the All-NBA teams because it's positionless? First and foremost, congrats, Unbiased Pistons fan. The suffering has come to an end in a matter of speaking. You've picked up the W. Now you just get back to the point of being frustrated by what Troy Weaver is doing or not doing, what Tom Gores might be saying, or what Monty Williams is doing. Is Jaden Ivey being too marginalized? What the fuck is going on with Rasar Thompson right now? Yada, yada, yada. But that form of suffering has come to an end. This is a great question about the All-NBA teams right now. I think what's going to end up happening, bigs will wind up getting the short shrift here. And I'm not going to say this player or these two players that it's going to come at their expense. And one, I think there will be some players who benefit because of the game's minimum, looking at that 65 game threshold. So while I could see it going positionless is going to hurt a Sabonis or a Randall, if those two dudes hit the game's minimum, I'm looking at Randall specifically on top of just his total minutes, that ends up helping them. The two players that I have singled out would be, just as I could see it, like it hurting them, is Anthony Davis and Rudy Gobert. And now Davis, you might get into a game's minimum conundrum at this point, but I think you just start to look at Rudy Gobert specifically. When you had the center spot, he is, I don't want to say I hate talking in absolute terms, but I think he might be my runaway defensive player of the year right now. And so if he was going to win that award, he just automatically, you get third team All NBA billing at that point, is what you should when you had the center spot. That doesn't exist. And so I would argue, if you believe he's going to win defensive player of the year, he is the player that this is going to hurt the most. After that, I could see it being an Anthony Davis type would be my second biggest pick, and maybe just a more legitimate pick because Davis does have that all-around impact. He's just a better offensive play finisher and has some more self-starting elements to his offensive game than Gobert. But when you start to get into the guards and wings equations of this, and so there are just 15 spots, and let me just, I don't have this list. Let me just off rip, see how many All-NBA locks we could say we can name. So there are 15 spots. We know that I'm starting to name 15 right off the bat, and now I just can't name any because there's so many balls going in my mind. You have in no particular order. You have Luka, you have Shea, you have Jokic, you have Embiid, you have, I think Tatum's going to make an All-NBA team, even though some of his individual numbers have been underwhelming. I would say one of, if not both, of Kevin Durant and LeBron James are locks, and so we're at 6 or 7 right there. Who else am I forgetting? Is Steph going to work? Like, Steph feels like he might be a lock at that point. That's 8. Like, De'Aaron Fox, he'd be a lock for me at this point. That's 9. And then you're going to have, like, now you're getting into the discussions of, well, who else belongs in there? Did I forget anybody else that needs to be in this, like, actual discussion? I'm sure that I did just by doing that off rip. But you have I'll call them the more debatables. And I'll use some of these guys as an example where it's, a Trae Young, a Jalen Brunson. Are they going to be on everyone's All-NBA teams? No, but the agency they have over the offense might help them curry favor over an Anthony Davis, certainly over a Rudy Gobert. So you have those names to watch. And then also just, it does feel like people might be gravitating more towards the wing types, especially if they've elevated their playmaking. Does Scotty Barnes get more consideration than a Rudy Gobert in this discussion. Like that is something that could actually happen, as bad as the Toronto Raptors may have been. We haven't even mentioned, like, is Kawhi going to play in it? Like if Kawhi plays in enough games, he will work his way into that. So I do think the game's minimum might take care of some of the awkwardness, but I can get to just off the cuff of having 10 locks. And that this is nothing about, well, will Devin Booker end up with enough playing time? Where does James Harden or Paul George end up in this discussion? And so I'm just sort of, again, I'm trying to focus strictly on the locks in my mind. And Jimmy Butler is, if he plays enough game, will probably be a lock. I think Bam will be another player. His case is always just so weird. This season, it felt like he might have had his strongest case, and so I'll loop him into there. Those three players, Bam, AD, and Gobert is just the answer. I just don't know if it's a fair one because he is the one position player, and you could, like, even, like, just because he's defensive player of the year, he's guaranteed to get that third center spot. Is that necessarily fair? You could argue that type of thinking might impede the case of a Davis or a Bam Adebayo because they're eligible at probably power forward and center in past years. But those are the three players I would say: Bam, Anthony Davis, and Gobert. I would say right now, at least two, if not all three of those guys are going to be left off an all-NBA team. And I think in large part, it will be not because they don't deserve it and not because the players who get elected to it don't deserve it, but it's just going to be more wing and guard heavy. I didn't even mention Donovan Mitchell at this point. So, like, it's just going to be so guard heavy that I think that ends up hurting all three of those dudes. Great question, though. We'll have to see where it kind of shakes out by the end of the year. Our next question comes from, oh man, this was, I gave this so much thought. Darkwing Duck, friend of the podcast, or says, friend of the podcast, Tony Jones thinks the last person to produce in the league like Lauri Markkanen is prime Klay Thompson. Do you have a better comp? I see where Tony's going with this, just because of how much of a play finisher Lauri Markkanen is, mostly from the perimeter. But the stuff that stands out aside from the size and the positional differences, and just, you know, when you're looking at offense, I get the comp to Klay a little bit, but not so much on defense. There's not as much chaotic movement to the way Markkanen is scoring on offense as there was with Thompson. And he's also, like, that's someone you're going to trust to be inside the arc a little bit more, shooting 60% on twos. Like, holy fucking shit, Lauri Markkanen there. And this is just the second straight year that he's averaging over 20 points while banging in more than 58% of his twos and more than 37% of his threes. The list of players to have multiple seasons of that are basically like LeBron James, and then the player who I'm actually going to compare him to. And I think this is, maybe it's too spicy, but I honestly think this is the one. And it's in part, it's team context dependent for sure. And it's not perfect, but I also think there's the size element of it. It's probably, and I'll say the first 2 years, but Warriors era Kevin Durant, to focus on another, like, person who's suited up for the Dubs. Just when you look at 2016, 2017, those first 2 years specifically, Kevin Durant was doing a lot of just, he did more on-ball work than Markkanen. I want to make that clear. Over 90% of Markkanen's three-pointers are coming off assists. Kevin Durant, like, that share was never that high, even in Golden State. But there was a point where more of his baskets were basically coming off of assists than self-created. And it wasn't, even though he was in the Warrior system, it wasn't off of this super complicated, like, running around momentum. It was the byproduct of, he is one of the most lethal shooters and finishers just from every level. Markkanen doesn't necessarily have that same mid-range, doesn't, like, if that's a hot take, isn't going to have that same, dribble pull up to his game from the mid-range. But, like, it just reminds me of that a little bit, where it's someone who is not strictly a play finisher. And I do think Markkanen definitely comes closer to actualizing strictly a play finisher's role than Kevin Durant would. But just in terms of, they can do more, but the way they're being used, or the way that they've been optimized and are most efficient, they're not doing the heaviest lifting. And that just reminds me, with that efficiency, with his role, of how Kevin Durant was used on the Warriors at time. I think if I really had to say it, it's sort of this, and it's two players who are better than him, but it's like this meld of Warriors era Kevin Durant and then the best version of Anthony Davis that the Lakers have seen, probably bubble Anthony Davis. Is it? And I'm looking strictly at offense here, not defense. I hope that's fair, not too spicy, or at least I hope Darkwing Duck or anybody else who's listening to this, you see where I'm coming from in that. It's a fascinating question to really think about, though, just because of how good Markkanen's been over these last two seasons. And we have three more questions, and two of them come from Rome 8180. Let's start with, I feel like I might have answered this one already, but I will answer it again. Is there a player archetype that you have a soft spot for? Is there a player type you have a disproportional dislike for? Lead guard types with size who always look like they could be something more are my soft spots here. And I think I have others where it's sort of like the connectors where I love a good Derek White. I love a good Nicholas Batum. Anyone who could do a no dip three is basically someone I'm going to love. But when I look at, and to use an example of some of my successes and failures, although I'll never admit to one of these failures, but like why I was so enamored with Frank Ntilikina is there was a smoothness to his game and he had some size at 6'5". And it never came together. The finishing package, the shooting package, the offensive motor, it just has yet to come together, even though he's the greatest player of all time. And so I look at him and I'm just fully going to believe that because he has that size, that he could be more. It's also why I was so enamored heading out of the draft. Now, did I know they were going to be this good? I want to make clear, no. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Tyrese Halliburton. And that's, again, like, oh, top 10 players right now. All NBA, Tyrese Halliburton, all NBA lock. I didn't mention him in that little brief exercise we did. That's what's so hard about doing it off rip. So I'm a sucker for those types of players. And if there's like more of a reclamation project, so I'm not just riding the coattails of somebody who is, already a superstar or an all NBA type player, the Frank Ntilikina archetype is just what I'm going to be drawn to. I'm trying to think of if there's anybody else in the league right now that might fit this mold a little bit more. Emmanuel Quickly is too small, but I would be a sucker for like that, where it's like he's not a good enough passer, but it's like he does so many other things. That might be more in the mold of the Frank Ntilikina. Like that would still be a soft spot, and why I have a soft spot for IQ, not just because I've watched him so long while he was on the Knicks. Keontae George, that would be, I was pretty high on him coming out of the draft. I don't know if he fits that kind of size thing. What does he has? He listed it 6'4". So I'll include him 6'4", 6'5" type where they're bigger than the Steph Currys. Even like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, I remember back in the day, and I was wrong on this. I'm going to use this as part of he's more of the connector type now. I'm going to use this as a failure. But when he was with Detroit, why I thought he was worth a max deal was because I thought he could be like a 1C creator type. And so like clearly that didn't pan out. It was why I was so enamored with Josh Jackson when he was coming into the draft. Why I was so enamored with Stanley Johnson for so long. And so it's those, and those were kind of wings, but it's a lead, not quite lead guard or wing type. So I think can be that, or at least offer more than just their specialty or connector production. When it comes to people that I maybe just player types I discriminate against, perhaps unfairly, I think a lot of people are just going to land on the pure 2. I land on the pure 4 who can't slide down to the 3 or get by at the 5. Especially if they're ball dominant, and so that they're not then totally scalable on offense to looking at what they do. And so I've held out hope for John Collins for so long, but I recognize that he kind of I called him infinitely scalable or scalable as fuck, whatever I said about him. There's still an element to that a little bit on offense, but he is a pure 4. I think that's, you look at Julius Randle, he is a pure 4, and he's probably become underrated. His legacy is going to be legacy for Julius Randle. We're going to look back on his career, or at least this like window of time of his career. And that's going to be a fascinating discussion to have at some point, especially if he makes a third all NBA team or third all-star game or third all-star game. But like, you can't play Randle at the 5. I guess some teams technically could. You're definitely not going to play him at the 3 because he can't guard that spot or even come close to it. It's just those pure 4 types. I thought Keegan Murray was going to end up being that, by the way. Talk about being wrong. He certainly leveled that up defensively. And when I refer to pure 4s, it does more so refer to defensive conundrums. And then you can endear yourself to me still, if you're John Collins, by being plug and play on the offensive end. But if you're, it's going to be, you have to work a lot harder, unfair or not, for me to fall in love with a Julius Randle type. And he certainly, he's wedged his way into my heart at points, but like just sort of those pure 4s, I can't bring myself, and even some people might view Pascal Siakam in this vein. I think he gives you more switchability on defense, and that there are teams that could get you away or get away with playing him as the 5. And no, everyone knows how high I'm on Evan Mobley. He's not a pure 4. Arguably, he's been miscast as a 4. He should be a 3 or a 5. That's what Evan Mobley should be. And so those are sort of that's probably the player archetypes I get a little like unhappy with, and not unhappy, but those are ones that I might hold to a higher bar. Just I'm not about them. And then there's also something to, even if just because they're switchable, like the players that I just view as replicable at what could be a lower cut rate, whereas I'm never going to be as high on a Grant Williams or a Miles Bridges on the court than I am going to on a lot of like other these players who I think can either do more or can be similar players who could be approximated for cheaper. Next question from Rome asks, where are we here? Oh, if Cleveland doesn't achieve what they want this year, is there a way for Toronto to get Donovan Mitchell? The Raptors may not want a guy who could leave, but I don't like the Mitchell fit in New York at all. Toronto intrigues me, though. I am with you on the Mitchell fit in New York. I still think you have Jalen Brunson now, and so there's a redundancy to getting another small guard there. If you wanted to go that route, I'm to harp on the Knicks for a second, you should probably focus on like DeJounte Murray is the move now because you don't have Emmanuel Quickley or RJ Barrett there. So I don't necessarily love that fit, but he's done enough on offense. I love it even less with having Randall and Brunson on the team. And then also you will have sacrificed probably too much 3-point volume going from IQ to OG Anunoby. And then it's whoever you're going to move now to DeJounte Murray. It just feels like your shot profile could get really messed up. There might be like a little bit too RJ, a more efficient RJ-ness to the shot profile. Toronto with Donovan Mitchell, I don't love it now because Emmanuel Quickley's there, and I think you want like you're gonna pay him, and so are you gonna invest in two of these smaller guards? I think they can play together just because of what Emmanuel Quickley does defensively. I think he can go. I think he's a combo guard defensively. I think that helps, and the fact that he's not just this A+ passer, it allows you to work with neither him and Mitchell are A+ passers, and so you'll get enough aggregate passing out of them and Scotty Barnes, maybe RJ Barrett if he sticks, to make it work. My distaste here would be, I don't know what the package looks like. What does Toronto have? Oh, there's the yawn. Age 35. I'm tired. What does the package look like? Like, what does Toronto have that Cleveland wants? They could restock Cleveland's draft well a little bit if you're moving Mitchell. And the price to get Mitchell, I'm assuming over the summer when he's entering the final year of his contract before his player option, it won't be that high. But like, what is Cleveland's not going to be looking to rebuild if they're trading Mitchell. And so it can't just be a picks thing. Who from the Raptors do you want on like that helps the Cavs? Are they going to have interest in RJ Barrett? They might almost need to if that's the route you're going to go here. And I don't think they're going to. You're not going to have interest even like, okay, Grady Dick, maybe. And so it's Grady Dick in salary. You're not going to throw Jakob Poeltl on a roster that has Jared Allen and Evan Mobley on it. Gary Trent Jr. will be a free agent. I guess there's a sign and trade thing to be worked out there. Dennis Schroeder becomes a little bit valuable in that trade, I suppose, because you are giving up Donovan Mitchell. So you're looking at the guards. Could there be like a sign and trade with Quickley involved? Probably not. I think Toronto would prefer to have Quickley at this point for what he does defensively and how much they trust Scotty Barnes. And then there's just, you don't want to give up too much in a player who's going to hit free agency and could or probably would leave Toronto. Unless the Raptors are on Mitchell's list. I don't think the Cavs trade Mitchell, by the way. At least, well, we're talking about the offseason, so that's more open for debate. It just gets weird. And so even if Siakam's on the roster, that'd be really, you talk about a gargantuan setup. Let's have Siakam with Mobley and Jared Allen. That would need to be a sign trade because he's going to be a free agent as well. I think you're probably looking at, so it needs to be picks and then Schroeder and Barrett. Like it's some combination of Schroeder, Barrett, Dick, and Grady Dick and picks, not Dick picks, just Grady Dick and picks, like some sort of combination of that. And I don't know. I think Cleveland can do better or for its roster, even if you like that asset play by moving Donovan Mitchell. And that's where it gets weird. And then I honestly just don't know. So if your core, let's say that Mitchell stays, if your core is Quickley, Mitchell, and Barnes as sort of your top three, and then Siakam is there, I like it. Do I love it? I don't know. It feels a little too wing light all of a sudden, which is a weird thing to say about Toronto. You still have Scotty Barnes there, so maybe not. I don't hate the fit of Mitchell in Toronto. I think I'd be more intrigued by seeing him go to a team that doesn't necessarily have the lead guard already in place. I guess though Mitchell's hit some gears defensively in Cleveland where I wouldn't hate it. As Rome, without talking me into it, you might have talked me into it. I just only don't think there's going to be a trade match there. And I would still be more intrigued with, all right, well, what happens if you put Donovan Mitchell in New Orleans? Or what happens? That's your team, Rome. Maybe you don't want to see Donovan Mitchell in New Orleans. What happens if you put Donovan Mitchell with Fred VanVleet in Houston and you're just kind of done with the Jalen Green experiment? I don't think that at all. Would Golden State get involved in that? I'd be more intrigued. I might be more intrigued by that. So they're not kind of my favorite destination, but they're intriguing enough even after the IQ RJ Barrett trade. Good question, though. We actually do have two questions left. This one comes from Austin about Andre Drummond. Is 2015 Andre Drummond, did 2015 Andre Drummond come through on a time loop? Yeah, he's been good for Chicago. Highest offensive rebounding rate of his career, second highest defensive rebounding rate of his career. I think what really helps him in Chicago, and look, he's still got offensive problems, man, with shot selection and finishing. True shooting below 56, that's a big yikes for a big man, especially when the league average is 58. What I think makes him so good in Chicago is he's playing in smaller bursts, and then they've simplified his role defensively. He's allowing sub 56% shooting at the hoop. There's that streamlined role defensively for him around the basket, and now it not only helps playing in smaller bursts, but all these aggressive perimeter defenders. A lot of the lineups you're going to see him in, and just a lot of the Bulls lineups in general, are 2 to 3 of Alex Caruso, Ayo Dosunmu, Javon Carter, and Patrick Williams on the court. That's massive for him when you look at how disruptive all of those guys can really be on the perimeter. I still think that he can be valuable as sort of not even a stopgap big, but it's just this cheaper option if you need a big, where it's like if New York isn't comfortable with Precious Achiuwa, sort of filling out their minutes at the 5 with once he's healthy, Jericho Sims, and then Isaiah Hartenstein, the absence of Mitchell Robinson. Or if the Grizzlies, they have Jaren Jackson Jr., there's some Xavier Tillman, but they don't want, he could work in Memphis like that, but he still kind of needs to be in that smaller burst role or around a bunch of other, not a bunch, but at least 2 other aggressive defenders. And so that's why maybe New York with OG would probably work for him, with OG and Hart is there. So that could help. Chicago, it just feels like it might be perfect for him. Where if you were looking at him to be the backup big, let's just say in Sacramento, for instance, or in Dallas, you're not going to have the same level of impact there, even though there's some better setup men in Sacramento and Dallas specifically. This will be the final question. Comes from, where is it? Oh, here we are. D Nitz, who are your favorite NBA writers and reporters and why? So some criteria here. I'm only going to focus on, there's 1 or 2 people who they're only doing specific team coverage, but I'm focusing on league-wide coverage in net. And I'm not going to include people who just podcast, where it's Steve Jones is on here for sure, but he's not writing. And so Nekias Duncan is definitely up there. He's not writing as often, but he and Steve Jones collectively, you know how I feel about the dunker spot. Some of the brightest minds in the business, and the way that I really appreciate when Nekias is writing, what he's able to do when he's breaking down perspective fits or new fits for guys who haven't necessarily played on these teams yet, when he's reacting to trade rumors or recent trades. I think he does an excellent job of that. You're going to laugh. He's my co-host, Grant Hughes, one of the most underrated writers in the business. I love the way he looks at the game. He just has these turns of phrases where he's both economical in his word count, but he's also just very clever and poignant. And so I love reading him and podcasting with him, and he's a genuine friend. So Grant. Caitlin Cooper, of course, shouted around this podcast many times. I know she predominantly does just Pacers, but she has branched out into league-wide coverage at points, and when she does, she absolutely kills it. And there's no one who is more nuanced, more specific, and then blends all that with, there's just not, whether it's even, and Zach Lowe's on this list as well. He doesn't need an explanation here. There's personality in his writing, in addition to it being in depth. And then I really like that he runs the spectrum of, he'll talk about rumors and prospective trade fits. It's not just all X's and O's, but what Caitlin Cooper is able to do from the X's and O's, breaking down the game perspective, to one, making it accessible to everybody, and then just a really fucking good writer. It's just not out there. There's maybe 3 to 5 people who do it, like can blend that as well as she does. And no one does it better than she does. Katie Heindel's also on there. The Basketball Feelings Substack. She's just absolutely great. Anytime I read anything she writes, I automatically hate everything I write that much more, because she is just a caps lock writer. And she's also good at touching into the emotional side of this game, of this league, of the difficult topics when there are podcasters and writers, and probably including myself, where we're too quiet or not loud enough when it comes to the Miles Bridges domestic violence allegations and issues. And the same thing with the Kristaps Porzingis rape allegations that just disappeared. Her willingness to step out on that limb, also as a woman in sports where you're going to be unfairly discriminated against to begin with from audiences, on top of just being so super talented, to just have that courage and the gall to talk about the profoundly important subjects that she does. I appreciate the content that she puts out there. And it's a different way of looking at the league for some people where it's not going to be as nitty gritty about the X's and O's. But that's a good change of pace. And it taps, like I said, into the emotional side of the game a lot more than anyone else is going to. And you can still, if you're a basketball sicko, you are still going to find so much enjoyment out of what she writes. Brian Toporek, coworker of mine, he is very good at what he does, especially from a salary cap perspective. I always love too when he gets to edit my pieces. If it's something on the Sixers specifically, he does write at Liberty Ballers. He's also writing at Forbes, but the salary cap, the CBA, knowing that he's all over that, it makes me feel more confident what's going out there. His podcast co-host, Mort Jensen, does a great job looking at the game league wide. I really like that his writing is very accessible to everybody, where he's able to distill down a lot of big picture stuff, or even some really nuanced, some tedious stuff, just down to like, okay, this was very economical in what he did. It was clear. It was well written. I came away understanding and learning something new. And he's very confident in his opinions. The way he is able to portray those, where I think a lot of us, for me, I don't want to be wrong. I'm going to hedge. And so I might use a lot of maybes and likes and I might not be absolute enough in a lot of my analysis. And I think Mort does a good job of like straddling that line of, no, he's not this absolutist, but he is definitive and confident in what he's saying. Dan Devine of Yahoo Sports now does like when he gets to go in depth, I love how in depth he's able to go on topics where he does what Bleacher Report does, what I've done a lot of the time and I strive to do is, yeah, you're going to have to do with these most interesting teams or X number of teams that do this or X number of players. And he's still able to go into detail and make it his own. But then when he does dive in to just that singular topic, one of the best things he wrote this year had to do with Wemby and the Spurs. He is really going to just bring the heat and the factual evidence support everything he's saying. One of the cleanest writers where the sentences can be like, they're a great version of long. There's like such a flow to the way that he is writing. Michael Pina of The Ringer is really good at what he does. He does a great job of covering a lot of ground in not too much space where it makes you feel like you're sitting there too long. And yet at the same time, when he goes into singular topics or reports on something, it's always going to be super informative, learn something new there as well. Rob Mahoney, one of my favorite writers of all time, he's on the level of Caitlin Cooper, where it's like, if you're taking someone's ability to just be a fucking incredible writer, but have this understanding of the game and then provide this factual evidence and then apply it to the entire league. Or it's not just diagnosing, it's prognosticating. It's not just acknowledging this is what I watched. It's, well, what can happen here, or what's going to be wrong here, or what could be done better? What would I suggest here? His reporting is really leveled up a notch as well since he's been at The Ringer, in my opinion. He and Dan Devine are probably two. I've never invited either of them on this podcast, I don't think, but those would be like dream podcast guests. Everyone else that I've named so far, I believe, with the exception of Zach Lowe, has been on this podcast. Nikias has not been on this either. He did help me with a Bleacher Report project once. He was provided his expertise for that. Some others, Amon Aiden, she's been on the podcast a few times. She's over at Pros and Claws. She does cover a lot of the Raptors, but she has branched out into other stuff as well. And she's good at tackling some really, they could be controversial topics or sensitive topics. And then she is able to go into and provide, entertaining analysis where it's like she's mixed with jokes on Twitter, but then her writing can sometimes include some of those, but then it's also like you're reading a different person in a good way. And that's something I've always done, not necessarily to emulate after Amon, but something I appreciate about her and something I always try and do. It's, yeah, I can come off as like snarky on Twitter, but my writing is going to be like, I can really turn a phrase if I want to. I'm not good at complimenting myself, but I can be a really good writer when the situation allows for it. And she's able to do that incredibly well. And I've always liked the stuff. She tackled a lot of I think where her strength is, like kind of outside the actual basketball stuff, is like when she was talking about the Damian Lillard trade request and how to view it, not just in terms of should the Raptors go after it, but how do you view someone like that and giving the one team trade request and that element of it. And she did a great job there. Esparahini, probably one of the hardest working guys in the business. I'm sure you all follow him on Twitter. He does a lot of multimedia stuff. He's been really great on video. He's a great Twitter follow. He does a lot of stuff with the Raptors, but he's really knowledgeable when it comes to the league as a whole. Keith Smith, reports some stuff, knows the CBA backwards and forwards. He is absolutely great. I think that's probably it just for now here. I'm sure I forgot people, but those are just like off the cuff. And when we're looking at peer reporters, I like Mark Stein. His Substack has been really useful. Jake Fisher, I like that he integrates like some personality into his reporting or analysis into his reporting. And sometimes it feels understated, where I think he had a lead on the Raptors trade for Anunoby, the intel that came, and just like he'll kind of sneak in these either they're like digs, they're not too biting, or just their personality in the reporting, where Zach Lowe does it too, and he just doesn't report as much. But like Jake Fisher's a lot of caps lock reporter, so I appreciate him doing that. But yeah, those are just some of the people. Those are the ones that I like to make sure that I'm reading consistently. And you all know I'm trying to consume as much content, podcasts, reading as much as I can. I don't do as much of the video stuff, like, because I love Ben Taylor. He's not really writing, but Thinking About Basketball is a great podcast. I don't watch nearly as much of his just like kind of singular topic videos as I should. For some reason, I guess like it's harder for me to sit down and watch a video and remain focused. When I'm reading, it's a lot of the time I'm doing cardio or something else. And then, of course, if I'm listening to a podcast, it's the same difference. I can't be doing cardio and watching a video for some reason. And I can't force myself to sit still and watch a video. I can't as well. I've done it, but as well. So thanks for asking that, D-Nits. I really appreciate when anyone cares enough to wonder about me, my preferences, proclivities, what have you. Thanks to everyone who made it through. This will go up in the middle of the day, which we normally don't do on Tuesday, January 2nd. Happy birthday to me, my Kevin Durant year. Celebrate with me by subscribing, sharing our content, telling people about us, help the community grow. Shout outs on social media. Really appreciate every single one of you and all the support that you've given us. And I'll reiterate once more, join the Discord. Even if you're not on Discord, download Discord, create the Discord account just to join our Discord. Link is in the podcast and YouTube description. Shout out to the one and only, forever and always, one of those big guard types who I feel like can do more, Frank Ntilikina.